Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 91. The Entrance Exam. It took some convincing, but Midoriya finally relented and allowed him to drive him to the entrance exam. He had to resort to mild guilt-tripping, but hey, a win is a win. He felt like a parent whose teenage kid was going through a phase of being too embarrassed to be seen with them, and the thought brought a smile to his face, even though the real reason Midoriya kept trying to refuse a ride was that he didn't want to be a bother. He was too kind. Toshinori had wanted to have a family when he was younger, but with All for One, that just wasn't feasible. It left too many weak points, provided too much leverage, and now it was a little too late for that. He was glad to have found Midoriya. He was like the son he never got the chance to have. Pulling up to the boys' apartment complex, he was unsurprised to find him already waiting outside, even though he was nearly 15 minutes early. That kid was beyond punctual, and looking more nervous than ever. He was sitting on the curb, wringing his hands and bouncing his leg at a frankly impressive frequency. Even still, his face lit up when he spotted Toshinori's truck pulling into the lot. He barely had time to put the car in park before Midoriya was scrambling into the passenger seat. Kami, the kid had anxiety radiating off of him like heat sweltering off the pavement in mid-July. "My boy, calm down. You're going to do great," he said with what he hoped to be a reassuring grin, though he looked a little too skeletal to be of much comfort to anyone in this form. Midoriya just let out a shaking, high-pitched groan in response, which had him laughing good-naturedly at the boy's expense. "Ah, there's that confidence," he shot back sarcastically. He let a comfortable silence fall over them for a few blocks before he spoke up again. "Did you eat breakfast?" "Mm-hmm," Midoriya confirmed. "Did you sleep?" "I slept an amount," he answered nervously. Toshinori laughed again. That was one of his favorite things he had learned about Midoriya over the last 10 months. He was actually quite funny once you got to know him. Glimmers of his personality shone through slowly but surely, and he hoped that he would be around long enough to see him blossom into the man Toshinori knew he could be. Life after retirement wasn't something he hadn't wished for in a long, long time, and the thought brought a smile to his face. They filled the rest of the drive with idle chit-chat until they pulled up to the front gate. "You've got this, my boy. I have enough faith in you for the both of us," he said. "Thanks, All Might," he replied, sounding no more convinced than he did when he got into the car. Oh well, he'd just have to wait and see then. Time would prove him right. Midoriya was going to do amazing, Toshinori thought tenderly as he watched him walk away, and then promptly trip about 10 feet past the front gate. That wasn't a great start. All right, this was it for him. Nearly 3 years of quasi-vigilantism, 3 years of living on the streets, and 10 months of a training program from hell and an uneven paving stone is what finally took him out. Well, everyone had their time. He'd had a good run. He'd accepted his fate when the pavement that had been rapidly approaching his face suddenly stopped. He felt his stomach turn, and he let out a sound that couldn't be described as dignified by any stretch of the imagination. "Are you okay?" he heard someone ask with a sweet voice. He was floating? All he could manage to do was look over to the source of the voice dumbly. It was a girl with short brown hair who looked to be the same age as him. "I used my quirk to stop you from falling. I'm sorry I didn't ask first, but I figured you wouldn't mind," she explained as she gently manhandled his feet back onto the ground and released her quirk. A gravity quirk? That was really cool. She pressed her fingers together to release it. Was it a 5-point touch activation? He didn't feel her touch him, so it must work on objects touching other objects. If that's the case, she probably touched his bag. "Isn't this all, like, way nerve-wracking?" she asked anxiously. I, well, guess I'll see you inside. Bye!" She dismissed herself before he could even form a coherent sentence. Well, he screwed that up. He wished the crooked paving stone took him out when it had the chance. His conversation skills were beyond hopeless. Not here to socialize, Izuku. Here for a test. Pick one thing to stress about at a time, he muttered to himself under his breath as he continued his march through the front doors. Once he was certain he knew where he was going, he hid himself away in a disused hall. He knew Kachan was going to be here, and he knew his assigned seat was going to be right next to him because they were from the same middle school. And he did not fancy sharing forced proximity with him for any amount of time. He would just wait here until the last of the crowd trickled in and slip in last second, just like he did at school. Some things never change. When the last second approached, Izuku slid through the auditorium doors right before they were closed, and President Mike was already on the stage. The sight of him helped assuage Izuku's anxiety. They'd only met once in person, but he felt like he knew them pretty well through Eraser and his radio show, of which Izuku had been an avid listener for several years now. They were a good person, and he hoped that he'd get the chance to know them better. He tried to get to his seat with as few disruptions as possible, but once he sat down, he knew that his entrance was going to be noticed. Deku, what the hell are you doing here? Kami. Even when he whispered, he was shouting. The people around them were giving them looks, so against his better judgment, he put a finger to his mouth and hoped that, for the first time in 15 years, Kachan would actually listen to him. Don't frickin' shush me! I told you not to apply to UA! He barked at him loud enough that Izuku wondered if he had hearing damage from his quirk, because that would honestly explain a lot. Kachan, please be quiet. People are staring. I won't get in your way. We aren't even going to the same testing centers, he whispered back at a slightly more acceptable volume. Get your eyes off my card. Whatever. You're going to get killed in there, shitty nerd. He sneered after looking around and realizing they had acquired an audience. Izuku did his best to ignore the murderous aura radiating off the boy next to him as Mike continued to explain how the test was supposed to go. He'd missed a good bit of the explanation due to Kachan's berating, but he's pretty sure he got the gist of it. Wait, 4 opponents were listed on the handout, but only 3 were listed for points on the display screen. What was... Excuse me, sir, but I have a question. A tall boy a few rows in the front of him spoke up. Hit me, President Mike exclaimed as the spotlight blinked to life above the boy. On the printout, you've listed 4 types of villains, not 3. With all respect, if this is an error on official UA materials, it is shameful. We are exemplary students. We expect the best from Japan's most notable school. A mistake such as this won't do, he chastised, with more misplaced confidence than Izuku could ever dream of. Additionally, you two back there, you've been arguing this whole time. Stop it. If you can't bother to take this seriously, then leave. You're distracting the rest of us, he continued, pointing an accusatory finger at him and Kachan. Oh, for heaven's sake. Now people were laughing at them. He hoped that girl from earlier couldn't see him. This was so embarrassing. He vaguely heard the explanation stating that the 4th opponent was just an obstacle, but he was more focused on sticking his head in the sand. As soon as he heard the first signs of a dismissal, he got as far away from Kachan as he could. Being around him wasn't great for his nerves. He did his best to stay toward the edge of the crowds as they all made their way to the buses that would be taking them to their testing grounds. Izuku boarded the bus last, like always, which usually ended up with him sitting at the front. But this time, the last picked seat was right next to the kid who had called him out for Kachan whisper shouting at him during Mike's orientation. He could see why that was the last pick spot. Whatever, he'd suffered worse. Luckily, it looked like the boy was focused on mentally preparing himself or something, so hopefully he wouldn't try to talk to Izuku at all. He made a disapproving face at him when he went to sit, but otherwise said nothing. What was up with today and forcing him to sit next to people who hated him? The bus ride was blessedly short, as Izuku did not want to spend any more time than necessary with the one person on this bus that he'd already managed to get into bad graces with. He wasn't even quirkless anymore. Maybe it was just a him thing. When the bus came to a stop to drop them off, Izuku got as far away from that kid and everyone else as quickly as possible. He let everyone else crowd in front of him to gawk at the enormity of the testing grounds and stayed back. He didn't want to start any more trouble than he already had. From his spot at the back of the group, he noticed that the girl who had saved him from a face full of concrete was here too, and she looked even more nervous than before. He should thank her, right? That would be a normal and good thing to do, probably. It'd get her mind off her anxiety and remind her that she could save people, even if it was just in little ways. That would make him feel better if he were in her shoes at least. With his mind made up, he steeled his nerves and made to walk into the throng of other examinees, only to be stopped about 5 steps in by a hand firmly grasping his shoulder. It scared the living daylights out of him, and he nearly went to flip whoever it was that grabbed him over and onto the ground, but he stopped himself at the last second and settled for wrenching himself out of their grasp. It was that tall boy from before. Of course. She looks like she's trying to focus on the trials ahead. What are you going to do? Distract her and ruin her chances to succeed? He asked, literally looking down his nose at Izuku. He'd been psyching himself up for the test ahead, and as it stood, he was stuck halfway between Ivy's confidence and his own timidity. He didn't try to justify his behavior with a response, nor did he dispute the boy's frankly wild accusation. He just stared back at the boy blankly before walking away, returning to his spot at the back of the group. What the hell was that guy's problem? Whatever. That guy's problem was that guy's problem, not Izuku's. For the first time in his life, he wished Kachan was here so that he could bully someone into their place, because that guy had a real stick up his ass. The thought of those two interacting made him chuckle. That kid should be impressed with himself. He had somehow managed to make the thought of Kachan's presence comforting for the first time in over a decade. Right, let's start, he heard President Mike's voice boom over the crowd as the massive gate in front of them opened. Well, he didn't need to be told twice. Time was ticking, and if he was allowed to separate himself from the oppressive aura of a crowd, then he would do so readily. As he ran straight down the center street, he encountered his first enemy. It was a massive robot with the number 1 painted on the side of it. This was a one-pointer? The thing was towering over him, and it had a damn machine gun for an arm. Oh, this is bullshit, he muttered under his breath before taking action. He wasn't going to use One for All unless it was absolutely necessary. He'd gotten pretty good at controlling it at very low percentages, but it wasn't perfect, and he couldn't afford to break a limb so early in the game. So with that in mind, he used a garbage can as a launch pad to jump up on top of a bus stop shelter. The robot came barreling after him, and Izuku stayed in place as it took aim, but he jumped to the left, off of the awning, as it fired. As he'd hoped, the bus shelter was reduced to rubble, and he was able to easily wrench a structural pipe from the wreckage. He couldn't break through solid metal without One for All, but this pipe sure could. Charging forward, he took a running leap and swung the pipe like a bat straight into the robot's head, which went flying before clattering to the ground about 15 feet away. Well, that was violent, and far easier than he had expected. These things were barely a step above glass cannons, which he supposed he wasn't one to critique about, but that was beside the point. They were intimidating more than anything. Well, that's not true. It did destroy that bus shelter. but they were easy to take down, or at least the one-pointers were. That made sense. Weed out the meek, but still make the opponents manageable for a middle schooler. Head in the game, Izuku. Now's not the time to meta-analyze the test. There weren't any more opponents in the immediate vicinity, so he took to the rooftops. The pristine fire escapes were much easier to climb than the rickety old rust buckets in Uptown. From his vantage point, he made his way over to an area void of other examinees, and with a few bots driving around aimlessly. As he got closer, he saw that they were all three-pointers, 4 in total. Hopefully, they weren't too much more trouble than the one-pointers. He didn't let himself think about that too much as he dropped down on the nearest one, using his full body weight to plunge the pipe in his hands down its spinal column. Kami. This was gruesome. The bot shuddered to the ground, and the remaining 3 turned their sights on him, so he charged his way into the center of all of them with a flimsy plan and reckless hope. He was in a plaza with a fountain and a bunch of massive decorative potted plants circling it. He passed the bot closest to him, letting it lock on him as a target before lining its shot up toward another bot and ducking behind one of the potted plants before it fired. The shot exploded the upper half of the other bot into an unrecognizable mass of smoke and sparking wires. How the hell was UA expecting to deal with the fallout if a student got shot by one of these? He was operating under the assumption that there was a fail-safe if someone couldn't dodge in time, because that was brutal. The bots weren't very smart because they fell for the same trick a second time before Izuku disposed of the last of them. Okay, 13 points. 13 points was good? He had no frame of reference. He hadn't seen anyone else yet. He'd gotten ahead of the crowd, and he was pretty deep into the mock city at this point. Now wasn't the time to be worrying about that, though. It didn't matter if 13 points was good. More points was better, so he took to the rooftops again. Izuku continued his tried-and-true drop-down ambush technique, but he was starting to get a little worried about his points. Other people were dropping robots like flies, and he swore that he just heard someone mutter about having gotten 52 points now. He only had 32. That was not good. Was that good? Maybe that other kid was an outlier? Up to this point, he had lost himself in his task, but now he was starting to panic. What if 32 points wasn't enough? There were only 2.5 minutes on the clock. He was taking down a 2-pointer as the clock ticked down to 2 minutes and the ground started to shake. Shota was watching the screens intently. His next batch of students was spread throughout these testing centers, so it was in his best interest to pay attention. One kid in Center B had caught his eye, bolting ahead of the group without hesitation. That was good. Usually, Zashi had to give him a push. Hesitance was something that could get you killed in the field. He skimmed over the monitors in front of him, but his eyes kept coming back to that one kid, and he couldn't figure out why. He was working intelligently. He clearly had a mind for tactics, but his points weren't anything special. Did he have a mental quirk? It was rare that someone with a non-physical quirk got into UA through the standard methods, but this kid looked to be doing just that. His points were barely enough to scrape by, but barely enough was still enough. Examinee on ground B, the one with the green hair. What's his quirk? He asked to no one in particular. All Might piped up from the back of the room, awkwardly shifting papers around but not actually reading off of them. Midori Izuku, quirk, superpower. It's a basic strength enhancer, he responded. That was weird. A strength enhancer? Really? He supposed that made sense. The kid had been throwing himself around with little to no effort, but he'd very rarely seen a kid with a quirk like that go at things so tactically. You calling dibs so soon, Eraser? Sekijiro poked. He hummed noncommittally. Might be. He always had a thing for underdogs. There's a difference between an underdog and ignored potential, Vlad, he shot back. Touched a nerve, did I? Sekijiro teased. Tell you what, you can have the bean sprout if you take Blondie too, he said, gesturing to a kid with an explosion quirk who was annihilating robots left and right with no regard to fellow examinees or property damage. Shota groaned at that. I have a feeling I'm going to have to anyway. You can't keep a loose cannon in check, he jabbed back a little more subtly than Sekijiro had. Huh, sounds like a deal to me, he scoffed, either ignoring or not catching the insult. He was mid-eye roll when a booming crash, loud enough to be heard from center campus, quieted the entire room. The kid he'd been keeping an eye on just destroyed the 0-pointer. Holy shit, he heard someone voice his thoughts exactly. Basic strength enhancer my ass, Snipe commented from behind him. That was the strength quirk? Had he even been using it before? Did he do the whole test quirkless? Why would he do that? He was using a salvaged pipe as a weapon, but he clearly didn't need it. Wait, was he okay? The whole city was rumbling as the ground erupted to his left and a behemoth of a robot burst out. It had a large 0 painted on it. That was the 0-pointer? Mike, you shady little shit. He was about to start running for the hills when he heard someone in the billowing shroud of dust shouting for help. As it settled, he saw the source. The girl who had saved him earlier had gotten trapped under a large piece of debris from what had once been the street before the 0-pointer had burst through it. Oh, crap. He needed to stop that thing. It was headed straight for her. What if he couldn't stop that thing? He needed backup. Kami, where's Arisa when you need him? Doesn't matter. He's not here. He still needed help. He blindly grabbed someone's shoulder from the throng of people running away and spun them around. It was the tall boy from earlier. Of freaking course it was that tall boy from earlier. Just his damn luck. Get her out of here, he instructed with a voice that left no room for argument before turning on his heel and running toward the robot that was flattening buildings without even seeming to notice they had been in its way. This was a terrible idea. He was tempted to test his theory about being able to use one for all at 100% without hurting his body, but there were too many people here, too many ways for that to go horribly wrong, so he couldn't risk it. He harnessed as much of the power as he could manage without feeling like he would explode and let it spread to every part of himself, hoping that would be enough to save his poor battered bones. As he leapt up, he saw sparks dancing around him, and it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. That was new. He tried to focus on that rather than the pain in his surely broken legs. Go for the head. It worked with the other robots. Why not this one? He could at least slow it down. Probably. Maybe. Well, it was too late to back down now. He poised himself to strike with his left arm and hoped against all hope that fortune shone upon him and he did not end up breaking anything else. Fortune did not shine upon him. The robot seemed to be pretty out of commission, so that was good, but his arm was broken, and for the second time today, the pavement was racing toward his face at an alarming rate, and there wasn't much of anything he could do about it. He idly hoped he was right and that UA had some sort of fail-safe rescue bot in place as he plummeted to his imminent death. Maybe he could try a full-power flick and make a shockwave to cushion his fall. He had already broken 3 limbs to varying degrees. What was one more finger at this point? He went to take aim when he saw the 2 students from earlier still below him. The girl was now on top of the debris that had been trapping her, which was nice, but he wished she would get out of the way. This wasn't going to be a pretty sight. He heard the boy shout something, and all of a sudden the slab of concrete and the girl were barreling toward him. Well, barreling toward him faster than they had been. Were they trying to save him? That was sweet. The girl in the massive slab of concrete wasn't slowing down, though. Oh, Kami, this was going to hurt, was the last thing he thought before everything went black. He was going to get rescue points for that. That stupid kid just broke 3 of his limbs, and he was going to get so many rescue points for that. Shota just knew it. The board members loved to reward idiotic, self-sacrificing bullshit. There was no way that kid wasn't getting in. The same went for that blonde boy. He'd gotten way too many points to not get in, and now Shota was stuck with both of them. Lord rest his soul, this was going to be a long year. End of chapter.